Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Micro-frontends in the Trenches. Today, I'm extremely pleased to introduce you to Matteo. Matteo is a colleague of mine in AWS, but more importantly, is a real micro-frontend pioneer. In fact, Matteo started more or less on my time when we started about talking about micro-frontends in 2015, 2014, that kind of time, but he will tell us more about that. So welcome, Matteo. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure having you. I'm super excited for all the insights that you can share today with the community. So, tell us a bit about yourself. When did you find microfrontends, or when you encounter microfrontends for the first time, and what you are doing right now, and so on?
Thank you, Luca. I'm a senior manager at AWS. I've been working on software engineering roles for about 20 years, including backend and front-end development, software architecture, and various leadership roles. I love technology, and in particular, anything around innovation, and because I like solving complex problems and using innovation to tackle interesting problems with efficiency and sustainability in mind. I started working on micro-frontends about 11 years ago. I was a software engineer on a company that was working on a very big website. I don't think at the time people were calling those things micro-frontends just yet. I was working on a big monolith. My team, in particular, was involved in a project that was about scaling a new particular approach. I remember that at the time the business was stuck with this big legacy piece of software that was very hard to approach, very hard to test. Uh, a team at some point developed particular expertise around search. So the team working on backend infrastructure decided to develop an hack. At the time, we called it an hack. It was basically creating what we called microsite. I think it was basically the same thing that today we will call micro-frontend. It was something that we decided to rebuild from scratch. It was a complete copy of the legacy website, but the older front end was rebuilt from scratch. And the same team that was working on the search backend decided to write the search front end because they wanted to be kind of tackling this problem with their domain knowledge. Uh, because it was very successful, they realized we want to do this for every area of the business. We want to restart. We want to start rethinking everything. And my team in particular was the team that was given this problem and said, solve it. I think the first iteration was pretty interesting. We decided that we started helping a lot other two teams to do the same, and immediately we realized, okay, we need some kind of solution for avoiding the kind of an end user to be affected by performance issues when going from microsite to microsite or micro frontend to micro frontend as we call them today. And we went through various iterations. I'm gonna save you from the whole story, but long story short, a few years later, we came up with this solution called Open Components. I think that's something we open sourced. It was pretty successful, and when I talk about it today, it feels weird because at the time I don't think components in the community meant the same thing that they mean today. I don't think I like the name today because Open Components wasn't really just about kind of components. At the time, I think when we open sourced it, even frameworks like React that maybe I would say democratized the word components, or maybe they gave it a new meaning, somehow weren't that popular just yet. And in practice, it was probably one of the first kind of button included framework for creating micro frontends. It allowed people to create micro frontends, but also I think something that is interesting and probably still kind of actual. It worked on the assumption that micro frontends are not just pieces of code and fragments of HTML. Built in, there was also a whole part about operations. So the framework was about creating, but also deploying, releasing, and somehow orchestrating them. In a way, this approach, while today maybe the framework is slightly I'm gonna say old, maybe is based on technologies that today have better solutions in a more modern world. I would say the basic idea of somehow merging the developer experience with the kind of operations concerns, and also all the orchestration part. Maybe it's still very actual. It's still the very basic foundation of every micro-frontend architecture, if you think about it. So, uh, is it about when we open source about open components that maybe we met, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember how many years ago. I think we had common friends, and then we met to discuss, and then we became friends.
Totally. It was funny because I still remember your talk. I think it was in Uruguay or something like South America for sure.
Mm.
When you have done a talk on I obviously watched on YouTube. I didn't come to the session, but I remember you did this on open components, explain how we're working. I said, okay, this guy has the same mindset that I have for approaching a similar problem, and I thought, okay, that would be extremely interesting to meet him and discuss a bit more about that. So I'm pretty glad that our life, let's say, overlaps very nicely, especially on something that we are both passionate about.
Yeah, and we also are colleagues now, so I think that's super
Yes.
awesome.
That's very cool. I agree. So I have a question for you because obviously, as I said, I think you are one of the people that looks holistically on the topic of architecture and distributed system. When I say that, I'm thinking, yes, I used to say in every engagement I have with customers and when I talk in my public talks, that architecture is not living in a vacuum. Is part of three main forces. So you have culture, you have organization structure, and you have architecture. When you touch one of those three, all the other shoes will be affected for better or worse. But we need to be intentional and thinking holistically on this thing. And I think you have this gift that you start to think holistically when you say, okay, I want to take this decision that might not be the best on the paper, but provides the right trade-off for the teams. And I think now that you are a manager, even more, your let's say technical vision and technical understanding mixed up with your let's say capability to create empathy with people and manage people is definitely a fantastic skills that not many has out there. So I was wondering, can you give us your point of view on how to structure teams in distributed system in general, not only micro-frontends, I would say.
Sure. I mean, there are a couple of things I learned over the years, and I'm gonna go with some sort of guidelines. I would say every organization is different. Every team is made of different people, so there is the need, similarly to software architecture, to of understanding what came before every time you try to think about what's next. But generally, in my experience, there are a few guidelines, as I said. So I would say the first kind of thing that we want to talk about is probably around ownership. So uh, when we design teams, you want to make sure that there is clear ownership of services and boundaries between teams. Um, there is something that is very popular, which is generally kind of coordination overhead. It is a kind of a concern that comes when you work with multiple teams. When you have loosely coupled services and you have strong ownership, the coordination overhead reduces. I think that's very important, and that's something that I like to start with. The second thing is being domain driven. It is kind of connected to ownership, but is slightly different. Generally speaking, this goes down to kind of avoiding teams that are siloed by technology. So if you structure your team around business domains or features, uh, there is shared ownership. There is basically shared ownership and knowledge of the stack within the team. So generally speaking, this will help the team to be a little bit more efficient. So the next thing for me is it goes about technology. So generally speaking, try to include and hire team members with expertise in core distributed systems. So when we talk about distributed systems, there are concerns that come they basically come up all the time. You want in your team people that are experts about, for example, asynchronous messaging, service discovery, caching. You're gonna have every team struggling with these issues, so you want to build a culture of sharing and also learning that makes sure that every team kind of is in possession of these core skills, or at least ensure that there is someone that is senior and experienced in each team so that they can actually approach these topics and these concerns in a mature way. Another thing about technology is, for me, and again, this is not just about micro-frontend or distributed system, but in distributed systems in particular, is invest in key areas that will help you to create a culture of automation and operational excellence in general. This obviously, as everywhere, similarly to how we work with the software architectures in general, you don't want to over optimize at the beginning when you work on something. But my kind of personal experience is that when you invest in operational excellence, this is an investment that will pay off almost immediately. Obviously, try to find a good balance. You don't want to spend 1 year and 5 teams to create a perfect infrastructure when you're not working upon a product. So being product aligned, as I said at the beginning, and being domain driven, having kind of an alignment in terms of business domain is still kind of the North Star. But while you do it, and also if you are someone that is in charge of designing these teams, so if you are kind of in a leadership position, personally, I would recommend investing on operational excellence. So things like observability to get started with, but also automation and testing. And one of my first personal favorites, continuous deployments. We are colleagues and we work in a company where continuous deployment is part of the culture and it's been there for I don't know, at least a decade or more. For some other people around out there, it's not the case sometimes. For me, continuous deployment really is something that kind of allows teams to become responsible and to own some of the technology problems. And it's definitely something that people should consider. So the last bits for me when designing teams is about culture. When you are someone in the position of working on team topologies, you are also someone that needs to role model a great culture, and you are someone that needs to create a good culture. I'm gonna mention just a few things. So first is slightly related to operational excellence. For me, is foster kind of a culture of blameless postmortems, allowing people to learn from each other, and also not trying to finger point everyone when something goes wrong. Super important. In practice, when you want to innovate and you want to deliver the best results, you need sometimes to fail. And you need to learn from your mistakes. In order to do that, you need to create psychological safety in your people. If they think that they're going to be, if people on the team think that they're going to be in troubles when they make mistakes, they will be questioning everything that they do. They will try to basically lose velocity, and that's not going to work for innovation because you need to iterate quickly. So for me, create a culture where people are encouraged, obviously within safety boundaries. You don't want people to bring down all the business every 5 minutes. But if they actually are thinking about operational excellence and you hire great people, trust them, and try to create a culture where there is psychological safety for them to fail and retry something new. And finally, still on the topic of culture communication. So communication is key, and you need to basically encourage collaboration when it's appropriate. So you want teams to be independent, so somehow to mirror your systems when they are loosely coupled. You want also teams to be sort of loosely coupled when they communicate, avoid overhead, but on the other hand, encourage that kind of communication that is great to have. So examples are, for example, design reviews. When you work on complex architectures and you are working on reviewing a kind of something that will affect the business, you can involve people from multiple teams to actually work on those designs because they are going to bring new opinions and very, very interesting insights. And if you create a culture where this is promoted, this is encouraged, that's going to bring very, very good benefits. And knowledge sharing sessions between teams, and also documentation, of course, one of my favorites. And try to have a culture of writing, and try to get people to write excellent documentation. That will be a great investment. So I would say those are kind of some of the guidelines. And I don't know if I answered your question. I could talk about this.
Totally. I think it's very interesting because are usually the points that I touch with new teams that are approaching micro-frontends for the first time, and resonates very well with me because I believe that when you're saying, okay, so we want to create a culture that foster innovation, we want to foster communication. Very often, I know that when I speak with customers, that some teams start saying, "Oh, yeah, because we are working on our micro-frontends. We don't know what's happening outside our world." But the reality is, it's not because you're embracing distributed system that you stop to communicate between teams. You have, let's say, different discussions that maybe are not into the drill of, oh, we are using this library or we are using this. Sometimes could happen, but it's not day to day. It's more about surfacing best practices, finding patterns that work more, stuff like that. And I really like how you explain that part. But based on what you said, I think I would like to drill down on two areas. Okay, so one pattern that I have seen very often, and moreover, I would like to start with another part that is the leadership. Right. So we have in this distributed system in general, but obviously in micro-frontends, you have till the monolith was there, the staff engineers, the distinguished engineers, the architects, engineering manager, senior engineering manager, all these leadership that currently they have to find a new place, if you want, or a new way to interpret their role in a distributed system, because we know that distributed systems are based on decentralization, and therefore from your perspective and your experience, how would what kind of recommendation would you provide to them in order to reinvent themselves in something that maybe is not now, oh, I'm dictating the tech stack, or I'm deciding every pattern that is inside the system?
So if I correctly understand your question, you're asking me how basically teams evolve
Yes,
when
teams, but
somebody.
specifically the tech leadership, right? Because we speak a lot about developers, we speak a lot about QAs and cross-functional teams, components teams, etc. But what about the leadership? If I am a staff engineer, principal engineer, how would you design the organization in order to foster their knowledge, but at the same time allow them to enable the teams?
Makes sense. Well, generally speaking, it is it is a full process that obviously needs to be approached um, with time. You can, I mean, one thing that I learned as a manager, coming from a kind of an individual contributor world, is um, when the output of some of your actions take way longer to kind of manifest and to compare to when you are an IC. As an IC, you are comfortable and used to operate and see the output of some of the things you do, sometimes in days, sometimes in weeks. When you are a manager, a leader, and I would say I include in this category also very, very senior ICs. So you mentioned staff engineers and principals, although distinguished engineers, that probably is similar, because at that point, your influence, your sphere of influence is so big that almost everything that you say sometimes has repercussions that you need to be aware of. I would say when you are on those roles, sometimes the output of some of the decisions you make takes months, sometimes quarters or years, to actually fully manifest to yourself. So personally, I will say when you make these decisions, it is important that you actually take care of considering that you need to wait. So in practice, it's important to understand what are your kind of short-term goals, and maybe try to delegate to the right people what you can do, and understand what is the vision, where do you want to go. So generally speaking, when you want to kind of reconfigure an architecture quite drastically, my personal kind of approach is try to understand if something like that happened before somewhere else, try to learn, and then try to go and still try to be customer centric when you're trying to think about the outputs. So in practice, think about a complete redesign of an architecture. Um, you won't be able to achieve the results with a current team topology. On the other hand, reconfiguring a team topology, it's not as easy as starting to rewrite a piece of software. So these people that make the decisions need to have first a little bit of technological acumen to understand what are the consequences of a new re-architecture, but also try to make these kind of changes with time, and be conscious that they involve people, they don't involve any more software. When you don't like a piece of software, you throw it away. When you are working with people, you can't just basically take a team and say, now you do nothing or you do something else. It's important that you work on some of these things gradually. So there is this famous Conway's law that says that and also its counterpart, which they call inverse Conway's law, Conway's maneuver, or something similar, which says, hey, the organization that you design should mirror. The software you design should mirror your communicational structures. So in practice, there should be kind of a good mapping between the design of your organization and your software. And when you want to influence a new piece of software, you can actually redesign your organization to mirror it. But in practice, it's not that easy. Redesigning software is way easier than redesigning kind of a team topology. So you need basically to keep both things in mind. And these people, I will say, should first, again, still double down, invest a lot in culture. Invest on the things that are always kind of valid, regardless of the architecture, regardless of the team topology. So as I said before, investing on automation or operational excellence is something that is always going to pay off. It's going to survive multiple reorgs. So culture and operational excellence for me are the North Stars, together with customer centricity. Whatever you do, you don't want probably to stop your business for 2 years while you're actually trying to achieve new business outcomes. Your business keeps going, and your customers are demanding things from you in terms of features, support, resolution of issues, etc. You want to design your kind of transition in such a way that your business can keep operating as usual. So in practice, it's hard. I will say architectures like a monolith to microservices, for me, sometimes are very successful because of this reason. They allow us to transition from A to B, including a kind of a middle, kind of a phase that stays in between, which is annoying because from a technological point of view is annoying to work on a piece of software in production that is half beautiful and half relying on slow and buggy legacy code. But in practice, it's beautiful because it's the thing that allows us to transition from A to B. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I guess what I'm trying to say is this leadership, when kind of working on these things, is absolutely responsible to actually ensure that we progress not just technologically, but also we take a kind of responsibility of all the people involved. So redesigning teams is hard. I think one story I love that I took from a book from Lara Hogan, who writes excellent materials about management, teams. She says, in one of her books, she said, once some of the people got very annoyed just because we asked them to change their desk, and just from that seems like something completely how can I say, minimal, can actually represent something very significant for some individuals. If you think about all the consequences of that, that could mean, hey, I'm actually in a place that maybe has the right light, or I have the right equipment here. I'm close to the people that I care about. Oh, this area in the office is particularly quiet, which I need for my focus. Here, I'm actually closer to my stakeholders. There are so many elements that you may forget when you just think about saying, "Hey, Luca, can you move from your desk from here to there?" And think about actually something even more complicated, like actually redesigning teams, reassigning ownership, working on something new. That is super complex. It has effects on the culture, on how on their lives. So it is important that we do that with empathy, and we also try to accommodate everyone's needs.
Okay, that's cool. I like that. So the other aspect about teams that I think you were working on one of I call the platform teams in OpenTable, and very often I've been asked, okay, about how this team would look like, what kind of skills we need, what do they need to do with micro-frontends? Do they stick around forever and ever? What kind of let's say do they own the performance piece of our platform? All these kind of questions around this platform team, because in the backend, if you want, we have this concept of SREs, a platform team that now I think is let's say a mandatory approach that we have seen, especially in the cloud. But what about micro-frontends? What can you tell us about that?
Uh, so I will say micro-frontends, they are not particularly different from a technological or cultural point of view to microservices. I will say there are a couple of particular different things that I think we need to be aware of. Because they are still decentralized in nature. So I think for me, the difference is we maybe just need additional diligence around kind of integration points and communication between teams. When we work, for example, on micro-frontends, for me, in my experience, there is the need of strong and clear API contracts. Because multiple teams on different kind of micro front ends, it's important to think about the API boundaries and make sure that there are very clear integration points. I wouldn't say that that's any different from distributed systems, but the problem of micro front ends is their integration is quite particular. You don't need to think just about how kind of a REST API kind of responds or how is interrogated. You need to think about also all the integration point in terms of styling, in terms of, for example, client-side JavaScript, common libraries, generally also the user experience and the performance of the overall experience. So the integration points are uh, important. And you need API contracts, clear API contracts on every layer. Another thing is we spoke about having teams that are loosely coupled. Um, for me, in micro-frontend, it's particularly important for teams to make sure that they have independent deployability. I will say if and again, I've seen successful implementations where that wasn't the case, but more often than not, I kind of observed that when teams actually are independent and they don't rely on each other and coordinating to actually release and deploy their the code they own, you typically not only have good outcomes in terms of speed, which sometimes is also overrated in this industry. What you actually get is actually more diligence around better interfaces, better documentation, and also better testing in general. Because if you maybe rely on other teams, maybe you are giving yourself the excuse to maybe lower your standards in terms of maybe test coverage or integration testing, which is particularly important. When you actually are completely independent, you know that when you want to release something, you don't want to break everyone else's code. So in practice, I think it's not just by being able to deploy independently, be fast. It's actually all that comes next that I think is very interesting for me. And last but not least, very important for micro frontends, I will say, in my experience, again, it's not a rule, but I've noticed that some of the most successful teams working on micro frontends tend to invest a good amount of effort on shared UX standards. It takes many forms, but generally speaking, having cross-team guidelines in terms of UI and UX is important to make sure that you provide a consistent experience across micro frontends for the end users. So it's about the experience, it's about the usability of the product, it's about kind of using your brand, basically creating a good experience in terms of performance. So in practice, there are also ways for implementing this. For example, design systems are kind of a very popular approach to this problem that helps you maybe with a consistent implementation of UI libraries that kind of incorporate some of the decisions that you made with your user experience teams or your designers. But I think it's way more than that. Generally speaking, is about having cross-team guidelines for anything that kind of includes the user experience. So have your engineering team to talk with the design department, or maybe even creating teams that actually contain both front-end engineers or back-end engineers or people that are expert about user experience and product. Don't again, let's not fall into creating silos. Let's try to design teams in such a way that they are able to collaborate together when it's appropriate. So that's kind of my top list. I would say the list of my top recommendations. Or
That's cool. And okay, so based on your experience, I'm pretty sure that you have seen some anti-patterns on how to structure a team. Can you provide me, I don't know, one or two examples?
I will say the first one. I mean, I wouldn't say that is necessarily related to micro frontend. Is mostly about, in general, about distributed systems. But I will say, in particular, in frontend, in micro frontends, I would say it applies. So the first one is, generally speaking, not over optimizing when it's too early. Generally speaking, it's a bad idea to spend 1 year on rebuilding something with zero business and customer outcomes. My personal experience with micro frontends is that when you work on those kind of architectures, it's very often to start from something like a monolith and slowly migrate to a micro frontends. I know that from a technical point of view, it seems like a waste of time to maybe start with something that you know you're going to have problems on in the future. But in practice, I think it's really useful, because I think starting simple is a general rule that we should observe on anything we do in tech. But generally speaking, especially in micro frontends, it helps really to understand how your business boundaries are kind of need to be designed, and how you can also design your software as a consequence of it. When your business is very mature and maybe you are working on a new architecture or maybe new area of the business, I have seen successful examples of people starting from micro-frontends from scratch. In general, there are nowadays also very, very good frameworks, very, very good tools. It's relatively simple today to start with something like Module Federation, to put together a few pieces of client-side rendered micro-frontend and ensure you have proper kind of diligence around practices, etc. But in practice, there are just so many trade-offs. For example, complexity around testing or integration. Do you need to take care of all of this at the beginning? So I will say that that's kind of an anti-pattern. Starting with something overcomplicated. So start simple. Monoliths are a great start, and going from monoliths to micro-frontends is something that so many people are doing. So you can learn from the others, and you can do it efficiently. Other kind of anti-patterns for me, we spoke about it at the beginning. Watch out for silos. You want to avoid silos in general. When you see them in the team, they are gonna they present a risk in terms of sustainability and resilience. So working on designing your domain boundaries correctly is a piece of is something important, but also making sure that in each team you have the diversity in terms of experience that you need, and also skills, so that you actually are kind of well set up for anything that can happen, including maybe new data around your business that you need to adjust to, or any issues that you may have with someone that maybe needs to go on holiday, and then the whole team is stuck because you don't have the expertise in the team. So in a way, avoid kind of silos. Try to make sure that there is specialization when it's needed, but also make sure that you have also good basic cross-functional skills.
So, based on your experience, tell us a bit more about the cultural side. What, let's say, companies should be aware when they think to structure their teams successfully for micro-frontends?
Yeah, I have a couple of tips that are probably more general to decentralized models in general. So for me, one thing that I want people to think about in terms of culture is first is include diverse perspectives. You want to see diversity in team members' background, experiences, and skills, because different viewpoints improve the system design. Another thing is assign inclusive leadership. So leadership should role model inclusive behaviors. So for me, it's important to seek input from all the team members. And try to value all voices. Another thing that I think I would like to talk about is enabling flexible work. When we talk about distributed systems, we can talk about distributed teams. If we enable flexible work and we support as leaders flexible schedules, remote work, I think this allows more diversity in when you design teams and when you structure them, and you also are able to attract talent from different backgrounds. And I think that's actually super important. Another thing is promote belonging. If you build an inclusive culture where all the team members are feel welcome, you help basically with the problem we discussed before about creating kind of silos. This basically helps teams to actually be more open and be part of a unique team. Another thing, because we are talking a little bit about diversity inclusion, review processes for biases. So when you hire, try to review how you hire, how you do performance reviews and assignments, to make sure that you ensure fairness, and also you remove structural biases. And finally, consider for your culture to set some DEI goals, so diversity, equity, inclusion goals. If you actually define some specific goals around diversity, for example, and you measure progress over time, I think that's going to help your organization to actually make progress. So make it a priority.
I like that. Very insightful. Now, with last question for you. So usually I always ask to all the guests here to give us some actionables, let's say items that people can take away from these interviews, and they can start to implement in their company. So on your side, based on your background, based on your experience, I believe that very interesting one would be, tell us some tips on team structure or governance, because you shared a lot of tips here and there during this discussion, but I would like that we crystallize few of them that can be actionable for our audience.
Sure. Let me share 3 tips that are very close to me. Given my background, I would say the first one is transparency and openness in general. I started falling in love with software and tech when I was young because of open source software. Being open was always kind of one of my passions. And I would say transparency takes many forms. So regardless of your role and place you are in your organizational hierarchy, when you are open, you actually can build trust. It really helps with building trust. Without trust, you go nowhere. So for me, as a manager, I face a lot of challenges every day. I need to understand when I can share information or when I should hold it, maybe for a while. Personally, I try to default to being open. I prefer taking the risk of oversharing than actually taking the risk of upholding information that would be very important and will prevent people to make good decisions. So again, use your judgment, but generally speaking, on a technical point of view, this also could mean advocate for great documentation, and try to make your team to share information on wikis rather than on private docs. Make all the code accessible to everyone so that everybody can learn, everybody can see how things work. Maybe your team or organizational goals or KPIs, make them visible to everyone. So I would say being open for me, it's a little bit of a personal mantra. I think it helps a lot in this industry. And personally, I think it's something that I invite everyone to consider. So I would say the second thing that is close to me, given my experience, is I think that when we work on organizations, leaders need to give the best tools to the developers. I would say when you try to save money in particular areas, it's almost like asking developers to drive as fast as they can with the worst car in the market and with with problems. So the reality is, if you want to have the best kind of outcomes, don't try to save money on good tech. Hire good developers, then trust them to do the best things and give them the best tools. We are towards the end, but let me share a very small story. Many years ago, I remember being so frustrated because I was working as an engineer on a platform on a containers platform. We had basically an infrastructure running on Mesos, and everything was running on our data centers, and we were not using the cloud a lot. When we had peak times, we literally had to create some code changes in GitHub to actually push all of our configuration to basically double the size of all of our containers clusters, just to be sure that all the traffic that will arrive on peak times will have enough containers to actually respond and to offer the same performance. I hated that. At that time, I think auto scaling on EC2 was something like 10 years ago, 10 years old. And in a way, in the organization, because of other choices, I mean, also because of complexity, that was actually hard. But I would say, I'm not accusing anyone, but at that time, I felt as a developer, I don't know if I want to work for a company where I still need to manually scale my instances, where the technology is there for me to actually use my time to actually develop better features or to actually innovate. So for me, that's kind of an interesting topic that is also connected to retaining great talent. If you actually give developers the best tools, they're going to stay with you and they're going to work on the best things. Otherwise, they're going to be frustrated and maybe they're going to leave. So the third one, very quickly for me, is try to establish processes for clear and fast decision making. For me, when you hire great people and you trust them to make the best decisions, this includes also simplifying some processes. Sometimes maybe it's also about removing the number of approvals that people need to go through to do their job. We spoke about continuous deployment before. That's kind of a technical example, but also create a kind of a culture that balances well speed and quality. So there are some decisions for me that sometimes you can take quickly because they are easily reversible. Kind of educate your teams to make those decisions very, very fast. They don't need all the data sometimes to do that. They can take some risks. We are basically talking about calculated risk. But there are other decisions that maybe take a little bit more consideration because they are very hard to reverse, sometimes impossible. And I know this is a little bit tip number 4. You asked me only for free, but I will say writing culture really helps with that. When you have some very, very hard decisions to make, having a culture of writing where you actually try to put this decision in a document, you get them in front of multiple people's eyes, and you actually use them to create alignment. I would say that actually works very well. It also is a very good framework to record your decisions over time and keep them there for all the posterity to remember. So that culture of writing helps with fast decision making for me.
Yeah, totally. I agree with you. The culture of writing that I found here in AWS helped me a lot also to rationalize my thoughts. Because very often, we have some ideas, we think that are going to work, we immediately start to code. But the reality is, if you didn't have, let's say at the beginning, the right intentions or the clarity of intents that you want to achieve a specific thing, you know that there was a cool thing to do, you know that you have some ideas, but you didn't really thought end to end the specific thing that you want to build. And instead, writing helps me a lot on my day to day. So definitely is a fantastic tips. Thanks for that. Okay, so thank you very much, Matteo, for your time. It was definitely extremely valuable for me, for sure, and for I hope also for everyone that is listening. And I hope to see you soon, definitely in the office, but also in these kind of interviews. So thank you everyone for listening to us, and see you in the next interview of my 50 cents.